The metal groans and twists, snapping like glass under a hydraulic press, while the water floods the air with the suffocating scent of wet coal and freezing iron. There are no more bands playing, no more illuminated salons, just the sound of fingernails clawing at the wood of a locked locker and the muffled screams of those who understood, far too early, that the lifeboats were gone. On that April night in 1912, in the middle of the North Atlantic, humanity's greatest engineering marvel became a vertical coffin, and the true story of what happened down there didn't survive in the official shipping company reports. It was recorded, minute by minute, in the damp pages of a diary abandoned inside a boot that sank to the deep. If you are drawn to the hidden truths that time tried to erase, to the scars left on the pages of those who were never given a voice, consider subscribing to the War Diaries. Today, we are opening the diary of a forgotten passenger lost in the shadows of the Titanic. We are stepping away from the blockbusters, the gilded cradles of first class, and the cold statistics of 500 lives lost, to focus on the silent terror of those who looked out at the freezing horizon and knew that help would never arrive. The promise of a new life and the illusion of safety. Weeks before that fatal night, the fragile, yellowed pages of this very diary smelled of fresh, dark ink and an almost heartbreakingly naive hope for thousands of emigrants, craftsmen, and second-class passengers who boarded the vessel in Southampton and Cherbourg. The RMS Titanic was not merely a steamship. It was a floating social elevator, a magnificent bridge of heavy steel spanning the vast, terrifying abyss between a past of unrelenting European hardship and the glittering, sunlit promise of a fresh start in America. The early entries speak of ordinary, deeply comforting details of maritime travel, the rich, welcoming aroma of roasted coffee drifting through the corridors in the morning, the sound of polished silverware softly clinking against fine porcelain in the grand dining saloon, the thick, warm carpet beneath their tired shoes, and the reassuring collective sense that human technology had finally conquered the unpredictable, savage fury of nature once and for all. Passengers walked the decks with light hearts, dreaming of new jobs, reunions with family members, and the quiet dignity of a stable future in a welcoming new land. Yet we must pause right here to examine the subtle, dangerous arrogance that unfailingly precedes history's greatest human disasters. The corporate management of the White Star Line had aggressively sold the world an absolute, unquestioned illusion, the unwavering narrative that the ship was physically, mathematically unsinkable. This manufactured myth of invincibility created a profound, toxic collective psychological trap among everyone on board, from the wealthy elites in first class down to the exhausted travelers resting in the quieter quarters below. When chilling ice warnings began ticking across the wireless telegraph wires from neighboring vessels, cutting through the crisp night air, the mood among the passengers and crew remained one of complete, unbothered nonchalance. People strolled casually across the open promenade decks, feeling the chilly Atlantic wind against their faces, entirely ignoring the increasingly obvious warning signs, because the system itself had conditioned them to believe that danger simply could not inhabit this floating palace of luxury and riveted steel. The absolute certainty that modern engineering shielded every soul on board against the raw chaos of the ocean felt unshakable, until the quiet stillness of the midnight hour was violently torn apart by a dry, chilling, crunching sound against the starboard flank. the impact, and the breaking of reality. The collision itself did not announce its arrival with a dramatic cinematic explosion that shakes the earth. Instead, it was registered as a deep, dull, reverberating tremor, as though the massive ocean itself were slowly rolling over and scraping its rugged, freezing spine against the iron belly of the ship. In the pages of the diary, the steady, elegant handwriting of the voyage's early days suddenly transforms into a series of trembling, hastily scribbled lines. The author notes waking up abruptly in the dark as the rhythmic pulsing of the massive engines fell silent. The roaring heart of the mechanical giant had simply stopped beating in the middle of the night, leaving behind an eerie, unnatural hush that immediately unsettled anyone awake enough to notice the change. As confused passengers poured out of their cabins into the dimly lit corridors, seeking answers from the crew, the sophisticated aura of elegance evaporated in a matter of seconds. Initial bewilderment quickly gave way to the cold, unforgiving mathematics of tragedy, the shocking, brutal scarcity of lifeboats, while junior officers attempted to maintain a fragile facade of calm order by handing out bulky cork life jackets with polite, reassuring smiles. The harsh physical reality of the disaster began crushing the thin veneer of human civility. The diary meticulously records the exact moment when the ship's bow began visibly tilting downward into the blackness, causing framed artwork on corridor walls to angle sharply and heavy passenger trunks to break free and slide across the sloping hardwood floors. It is at this exact, agonizing instant that humanity fractures in the most brutal way imaginable, divided strictly between the blind, desperate panic of those fighting their way toward the boat deck and the quiet, crushing paralysis of those who suddenly realized the iron gates of the lower classes were locked to keep them trapped below. The cold awakening on the deck. As the reality of the sinking began to bleed through the bulkhead walls, the diary's entries shift from mere confusion to a chilling documentation of systemic abandonment. Stepping out onto the open deck, the author describes a world turned upside down by panic and freezing air. The immense scale of the ship, which moments before felt like an invincible fortress, now resembled a tilted stage set preparing for a catastrophic collapse. The sky above was brilliantly clear, glittering with thousands of indifferent stars, while the dark ocean below waited like an open mouth in the winter night. The psychological atmosphere among the passengers had transformed entirely. The initial polite confusion dissolved into an acute, primal awareness of mortality. People clutched their lifebelts with white knuckles, staring frantically across the dark water toward the horizon, desperately searching for the silhouette of a rescuing vessel that never appeared. The diary records the haunting dissociation felt by many who simply could not process that the magnificent vessel could possibly fail them. Husbands and wives looked at each other with quiet dread, realizing that the tickets they had purchased for a new life had instead bought them a front-row seat to an unimaginable maritime nightmare. Every minute that ticked past felt like an eternity, measured not by the hands of pocket watches, but by the steady, terrifying descent of the bow deeper into the freezing grip of the Atlantic. The brutal mathematics of survival. As the darkest hours of dawn drew closer, the diary ceases to function as a conventional chronological record and transforms into raw, jagged fragments of pure human despair. The forward tilt of the deck grew steeper with every passing 10 minutes, turning the open pathways into treacherous, icy slopes coated in freezing spray. We need to pause here to truly grasp the suffocating psychological weight of being trapped inside an enclosed vessel, sinking slowly in the middle of nowhere. When the distance between life and death shrinks down to inches of rising, freezing water, climbing stairwells and corridors, abstract social structures collapse entirely. The diary details heartbreaking human choices. Fathers choosing to remain behind on the lower decks, holding their children tight because the lifeboats had already departed half empty due to utter administrative chaos and a paralyzing fear that the descent cables would snap. Men standing at the rail staring out into the endless black expanse, knowing with absolute certainty that jumping into those polar waters meant facing a slow, agonizing death by hypothermia in under 15 minutes. The writing across the diary pages grows increasingly scarce, squeezed tightly into the outer margins as oil lamps flicker and die out one by one in the flooded lower decks. The author describes the haunting sound of the ship groaning under the unbearable water pressure, like a massive wounded animal refusing to lie down. We hear the distant crash of tons of fine china shattering in the pantries, the faint, surreal echo of ragtime music played by the heroic band on the upper deck, attempting to steady panicked nerves, and the biting cold beginning to numb the fingers, turning every subsequent word into a desperate act of physical endurance. The abyss and the breaking of silence. In the final, legible lines of the diary, written by the frantic, flickering light of a single match or an improvised candle stub, the tone shifts radically from terror to a melancholic, terrifying clarity. The author writes of watching people slip across the dangerously slanted deck, plunging headfirst into the abyss as the Titanic's massive stern rose dozens of feet into the air, starkly silhouetted against a night sky studded with cold, indifferent stars. It is the profound moment where the machine surrenders to nature entirely. The diary records the deafening, structural roar of steel plates tearing violently in half, the muffled underground thunder of the boiler rooms exploding upon direct contact with the rushing seawater, and right after, the most absolute, deafening silence the Earth has ever produced. A silence far heavier than the ocean itself. The author notes the freezing water invading the room, covering ankles, knees, chest, and then the written words stop abruptly right in the middle of a sentence, cut short by a dark smudge of ink where the relentless sea finally swallowed both the notebook and the hands holding it. The physical manifestation of human testimony was silenced in an instant, leaving behind only the cold expanse of the midnight sea and the vast emptiness of the North Atlantic. The ocean swallowed the Titanic in a matter of minutes, taking with it over 1,500 lives that were swiftly reduced to mere numbers in insurance reports that spring of 1912. But the sea could never fully erase the echo of that final attempt to document human pain. When the diary was recovered years later, trapped securely inside the personal belongings of an unidentified body pulled from the water by search parties, it reminded humanity of the true, devastating cost of our blind pursuit of progress. The water melted the floating ice. Time buried the iron hull 4,000 meters deep in total darkness, but the heavy weight of those ink-stained pages continues to float on the surface of history. If you felt the profound weight of this journey, leave a comment below, share your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next dark archive we unlock. Until the next diary.